The girl's hand didn't shake as she rolled up her sleeve, but her brother's medical bills felt heavier than the iron gates she'd just walked through. Amara Rhodes stood in a chamber that looked like it had been carved from moonlight and old money, all white marble veined with silver, all silence that pressed against her eardrums like deep water. The vampire sitting across the table watched her with eyes the color of winter ice, pale hands folded on the polished surface between them. His hair fell white as fresh snow past his shoulders, and his skin held that particular luminescence she'd only ever seen in paintings of saints, that quality of something preserved beyond death's reach. "I'm told you requested an audience with the Blood Court," he said. His voice carried an accent she couldn't place, something that suggested centuries rather than countries. "I am Bastian Nyx. I rule here." Amara had practiced this speech for 3 days, ever since she'd learned that the experimental treatment for her brother's bone marrow failure cost more than she'd earn in 10 lifetimes, and that the vampire nobility occasionally purchased what they needed from willing humans. She'd memorized every word, but now they came out raw and simple. "My brother is dying. He's 19. The doctors say there's a treatment, gene therapy, experimental, but it costs $2 million. I don't have $2 million. I don't have 2,000. She pushed her bare forearm forward across the table. "But I have this. I'm healthy. My blood work came back perfect. I'm O-negative, universal donor. I know vampire blood is worth something to you, to your people. I'm offering a contract. Regular donations, as much as you need, for as long as you need, in exchange for funding Marcus's treatment." She'd expected him to lean forward. She'd expected to see hunger in those ice-chip eyes, or at least interest. Instead, Bastian Nyx went very still, in a way that reminded her that stillness was a predator's tool. "You would trade your blood," he said slowly. "For money." "For my brother's life." Amara kept her arm extended. "I've done the research. Vampires pay anywhere from $500 to $2,000 per pint on the black market, depending on blood type and quality. O-negative goes for premium rates. If you take 2 pints a month, that's $48,000 a year, minimum. I'm offering exclusivity. A guaranteed source. No bidding wars, no quality concerns, no legal complications. Take what you need until the debt is paid." The Vampire King rose from his chair, and Amara realized for the first time how tall he was, how his presence seemed to fill the white chamber until it felt less like a negotiating room and more like a throne room. He moved around the table with that particular vampire grace that made them all look like they were dancing through oil, every motion fluid and precise. But he didn't reach for her arm. He looked at it, at the blue veins visible beneath her skin, at the pulse point in her wrist, and something in his expression shifted into what might have been grief. "No," Bastian said. Amara blinked. "I'm sorry?" "I said no. I will not take your blood, not a single drop." The words hit her like cold water. She'd prepared for negotiation, for higher demands, for discomfort and fear and the sharp sting of fangs. She hadn't prepared for refusal. "I don't understand. Isn't this what you do? Isn't this how the blood court works?" Her voice rose, desperation cracking through her careful composure. "I've read the histories, the contracts. Vampires have been buying blood from humans for centuries. It's legal, it's regulated. I'm not asking for charity, I'm offering a fair trade." "Fair," he repeated the word like it tasted of poison. "You believe this would be fair? More fair than watching my brother die when I have something that could save him." Amara stood too, facing him across 3 feet of marble floor. "Please, I'll sign whatever contracts you want. I'll submit to medical monitoring. I'll take the supplements, follow the donation schedules, everything by the book. Just tell me what you want and I'll do it." Bastian turned away from her, walking to the tall windows that overlooked the city. This, deep beneath the old courthouse district, beneath the renovated historical building that served as the court's public face, the windows should have shown dirt or foundation. Instead, they displayed what looked like a twilight cityscape, all glittering lights and dark sky. Illusion magic, Amara realized. Even here, surrounded by wealth that could save Marcus, the vampires needed to pretend they could see the stars. "Your brother's treatment," Bastian said, still watching the false sky. "The gene therapy. It's being conducted at St. Catherine's Medical Center under Dr. Helena Voss. Phase 2 clinical trials, very promising results. Your brother Marcus was accepted into the trial 3 weeks ago, but you cannot afford the participation fees or the auxiliary medications. Amara's breath caught. How do you know that? Because I make it my business to know what drives humans to my door offering their veins. He turned back to face her, and his expression held something ancient and tired. Do you know how many people come here each month, Amara Rhodes? How many humans stand where you're standing and make the same offer? 20? 30? Sometimes more. College students with debt, parents with sick children, people who've run out of every other option, who've been failed by every system meant to catch them, who arrive at my gates because they've learned to think of their own bodies as currency. Then why does it bother you? The question came out sharp, edged with the fear turning toxic in her chest. If it happens all the time, if it's normal, why won't you just take what I'm offering and let me save my brother? Because it shouldn't be normal. Bastian's voice dropped, and for the first time she heard real anger in it, though she suspected it wasn't directed at her. Because you shouldn't have to bleed to afford medicine. Because I am tired of being the solution to a problem my kind didn't create, but profit from nonetheless. He moved back to the table and drew something from his coat pocket, a slim leather portfolio embossed with silver. When he opened it and began writing, Amara saw it was a checkbook, the kind rich people still used for large transactions. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Funding your brother's treatment," he wrote with quick, precise strokes. "The full amount, $2.3 million to cover the therapy, medications, hospital stays, and follow-up care for 5 years. Amara's legs went weak. "I can't just take that. I told you I'm not asking for charity." "You're not taking anything. I'm giving it." Bastian tore the check free and held it out to her. "There are no conditions, no contracts, no obligation. You walk out of here with this, you pay for your brother's treatment, and you never have to see me again." She stared at the check, at the numbers that represented Marcus's life written in bold black ink, and couldn't make herself reach for it. Nothing in her experience, in her careful research about vampire culture and blood economics, had prepared her for this. "Why?" she whispered. Bastian's ice-pale eyes met hers, and she saw something in them that looked almost like pain. "Because you came here ready to trade pieces of yourself to save someone you love, and you did it without hesitation, without even questioning whether you should. Because you calculated your own worth in pints and thought it was reasonable." He stepped closer, and his voice went soft. "Because when I look at you, I see everything wrong with the system I've allowed to exist. And because I fell in love with your courage the moment you laid your arm on that table, and I will not love you by taking from you." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and true. Amara took the check with shaking hands. The paper felt too light to represent everything it meant, too fragile to hold her brother's future. She looked up at the vampire king, at this ancient being who'd just offered her everything she needed while asking for nothing, and felt the world tilt on its axis. "I don't even know you," she said, but her voice was unsteady. "No," Bastian agreed, "but I would like you to, if you're willing, after your brother is well, after you've had time to see that this gift comes with no hidden hooks." He smiled, and it made him look less like a predator and more like something achingly lonely. "I'm told I can be decent company when I'm not refusing to drain hopeful donors." Amara left the blood court in a daze, the check burning in her pocket like a promise. Marcus's treatment began 4 days later. The gene therapy took 6 months of careful administration, of hospital stays and monitoring and medications that Amara could suddenly afford without counting pennies. She watched her brother go from gray-faced and exhausted to pink-cheeked and restless, watched him complain about the hospital food and flirt with the nurses and talk about going back to college. She watched him live, and every healthy breath he took felt like a miracle she hadn't earned. The Vampire King called once, 2 weeks after their meeting, just to ask if Marcus had started treatment. He didn't ask to see her. He didn't press for gratitude or acknowledgement. He simply wanted to know if the money had been enough, if there was anything else needed. Amara told him everything was fine, and then spent 3 hours after the call trying to understand why hearing his voice had made her chest feel tight. She went back to the blood court 3 months into Marcus's treatment, not because she had to, but because she couldn't stop thinking about what Bastian had said, about humans offering themselves up, about systems that made people into currency. She'd never questioned it before, the casual way blood banks paid for donations, the way vampire society's entire economy seemed built on the idea that human blood was a commodity to be bought and sold. The gates opened for her without question this time, and the same white chamber welcomed her back. Bastian was waiting, standing by those false windows again, and when he turned to see her, his expression shifted through several emotions too quickly for her to name them all. "Amara," he said, and made her name sound like something precious. "Is Marcus well?" "He's responding to the treatment. The doctors are optimistic." She stepped further into the room, feeling less afraid than she had the first time, but more uncertain. "I came because I wanted to understand something you said. About the system. About it being wrong." Bastian gestured to a chair, a more comfortable one than the negotiating table offered, and took his own seat across from her. The setting felt less formal this time, more like a conversation between two people than a business transaction. "The blood tithe," he said. "That's what we call it in the older documentation. It goes back centuries, to when vampires first revealed themselves to human governments and negotiated our place in modern society. We needed a reliable food source. Humans needed money. The solution seemed elegant at the time." "But you don't think it is anymore," Amara said. "I think it was elegant for vampires and expensive for humans." Bastian leaned forward, his pale hands clasped between his knees. "When you're immortal, when you have centuries to accumulate wealth, it's easy to forget what desperation looks like. It's easy to tell yourself that every human who comes to sell their blood does so freely, that the contracts are voluntary, that we're providing a service. But then someone like you walks in, ready to bleed herself for years to afford medicine that should have been accessible in the first place, and the lie becomes impossible to ignore." Amara thought about the moment she'd first learned about blood sales, about how quickly she'd accepted it as the only option, how she hadn't even questioned whether there might be another way, because in her experience, people like her didn't get other ways. "How long have you been the Vampire King?" she asked. 43 years officially. I've held various leadership positions within the court for longer than that." He smiled faintly. "I'm young by vampire standards. Most of the truly old ones retreated from active governance decades ago. They found it exhausting, trying to adapt to each new human generation. I was supposed to be more flexible, more modern in my thinking." "And are you?" "I thought I was. I updated contracts, improved medical screening, established safety standards for donations. I made the system more efficient." His expression darkened. "I never stopped to question whether the system should exist at all." They talked for 3 hours that first visit, about economics and ethics, about the way power structures made their own logic seem inevitable. Bastian told her about the vampire houses that had grown wealthy on blood trading, about the political resistance he'd face if he tried to change the status quo. Amara told him about watching her parents work themselves to exhaustion for medical debt, about learning early that her family's survival required accepting things that felt wrong. She left that meeting with more questions than answers, but also with a strange sense of possibility, like she'd found someone who saw the same problems she did and refused to pretend they were acceptable. Amara started visiting the blood court regularly after that, always during evening hours when Bastian held his open sessions. She watched him conduct business, saw how he dealt with petitioners and complaints, and the endless, small conflicts that came with governing a population. He was patient with humans, firm with vampires who tried to exploit loopholes, and absolutely immovable when he believed something was wrong. She also saw how the other vampires watched him, with a mixture of respect and wariness that suggested his authority wasn't universally loved. "You're thinking loudly," Bastian said one night, after the last petitioner had left and they were alone in the white chamber again. "I can see it in your face." "I'm thinking about how many people here probably hate what you're considering," Amara said. She'd grown comfortable enough with him to be direct, changing the blood trade. It's their economy, their whole way of life. They're not going to just let you dismantle it. "No, they're not." Bastian moved to a cabinet and pulled out 2 glasses and a bottle of wine, the human kind that he couldn't drink but kept for guests. He poured one for her without asking, having learned her preferences over their many conversations. The House of Corvus has already filed formal complaints about my concerning rhetoric. House Drackle wants a vote of no confidence. 3 of my advisors have suggested I might want to reconsider my position for the sake of stability. Amara accepted the wine, watching him over the rim. Are you going to? Reconsider? Bastian laughed, a sharp sound. I've spent weeks reviewing our financial records, looking at where our wealth comes from. Do you know what I found? The blood tithe accounts for less than 15% of the court's total income. 15%. We're not dependent on it. We're not even especially reliant on it. We buy human blood because it's traditional, because it's how we've always done things, because it maintains a certain relationship between our people and yours. A relationship where humans are the resource, Amara said quietly. Exactly. He set his own empty glass down with a sharp click. And I'm finished with it. I'm formally proposing to the full court next month that we phase out commercial blood purchase entirely. We'll establish donation centers, fully voluntary, with no monetary compensation. We'll fund them through our existing wealth. Any vampire caught purchasing blood on the black market will face exile. Any house that continues the trade will lose their court recognition. Amara's heart started to race. That's going to cause a war. Perhaps. Bastian met her eyes. I'll need allies, humans who can testify about the coercion built into the current system, people who felt forced to sell themselves and can articulate why that matters. I know I'm asking for something difficult, but I wondered if you'd consider speaking at the session. Your story, your willingness to offer years of your blood for your brother's life, it illustrates everything wrong with what we've built. She should have said no. She should have remembered that she was just a human woman who'd gotten lucky with a check, that vampire politics were dangerous, that making herself visible to creatures who'd ruled for centuries was asking for trouble. But she thought about the other people who'd stood in this chamber offering their veins, about the system that had made her think of herself in pints and prices. I'll do it, Amara said. The month before the court session felt like falling and flying at the same time. Amara spent her days at the hospital with Marcus, who was now in remission and talking excitedly about the future, and her evenings at the blood court with Bastian, helping him prepare documentation and testimony. They worked side by side at that white marble table, surrounded by centuries of legal precedent that he was methodically tearing apart. She learned things about him during those long nights, that he'd been turned at 28 by a vampire who'd loved him and left him, that he'd spent his first century furious about his transformation and his second century trying to make peace with it, that he missed sunlight more than anything else, missed the warmth of it on his skin, that he played chess and read philosophy and had a completely unexpected fondness for old detective novels. She learned that when he concentrated, he had a habit of running his hand through his white hair, pushing it back from his face in a gesture that made him look young and frustrated. She learned that his laugh, when she managed to surprise it out of him, sounded like something he didn't use often enough. She learned that he never, not once, looked at her throat or her wrists with hunger, that he drank bagged blood from the court's medical supplies, and did it privately, like it was something shameful. "You don't have to do that," she said one night when she'd arrived early and found him finishing his meal. He'd immediately set the bag aside, but she'd seen the flash of discomfort in his eyes. "Hide it from me. What you need." "I'm not hiding. I'm being respectful." Bastian disposed of the empty bag in a medical waste container. "You came here once offering me your blood. The least I can do is not remind you that I drink it. Not mine, but someone's." Amara leaned against the table. "Does it bother you? The fact that you need blood at all?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Every single day," he finally said. "I didn't choose this. I didn't want to become something that has to consume others to survive. But I am, and I do, and I've spent 2 centuries trying to make peace with that reality. The best I've managed is trying to ensure that the blood I drink comes from sources that aren't desperate, that aren't coerced, that made the choice freely." "Is there such a thing as a free choice when someone's offering you money?" Amara asked. That's the question, isn't it?" Bastian smiled, sad and sharp. "That's why I'm tearing down everything my predecessors built. Because I don't think there is. Not when the economic pressure exists. Not when people learn to see themselves as products." Amara moved closer to him, drawn by an impulse she didn't fully examine. You're trying to save people from becoming what I almost became. I'm trying to save people from a system that turns self-sacrifice into market value. He looked down at her, and there was something fierce in his pale eyes. You offered me everything, and you thought it was reasonable. And I've spent every day since then imagining all the other people who've stood here and made the same offer, all the ways we've normalized exploitation because we dressed it up in legal language and safety protocols. I can't do it anymore. Even if it cost me my crown, I can't keep pretending this is acceptable. You could lose everything, Amara said, frightened suddenly by how much he was risking, by how much it mattered to her that he survived this. Everything except you, I hope. Bastian reached out and gently, carefully, tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear. His fingers were cool against her skin, but his touch was achingly gentle. I told you once that I fell in love with your courage. I should tell you now that I've fallen in love with everything else too. Your stubbornness, your anger at injustice, the way you visit your brother every single day and bring him terrible jokes, the way you've spent a month helping me commit political suicide because you believe it's right. Amara's breath caught. She'd been half in love with him for weeks, she realized, had been falling steadily from the moment he'd refused to take what she'd offered and gave her everything instead. I'm human, she whispered. I'm going to age and die, and you're going to stay exactly as you are. I know. Bastian's hand moved from her hair to cup her cheek. I've thought about that every day too, about how loving you means losing you, how it means watching time take you from me. And I still want it. I want every year, every day, every moment you're willing to give me. Not your blood, never your blood, just your time, your company, your impossible courage. If you'll have me. She kissed him then, rising on her toes to press her mouth to his, and felt him go very still before he kissed her back with a gentleness that made her chest ache. He tasted like nothing, like cool water, like something preserved and perfect. His hands stayed careful on her face, like he was afraid of breaking her, and when they finally pulled apart, he was breathing hard despite not needing the air. I'm not fragile, Amara said. You're human. Everything about you is fragile. But he smiled as he said it, and kissed her again, less carefully this time. The court session took place in a chamber Amara had never seen before, something vast and ancient carved from black stone instead of white marble, with a ceiling that rose into shadows, and walls lined with vampires who looked like they'd stepped out of history books. The older ones wore their centuries-like clothing, all pale skin and colorless hair, and eyes that reflected too much light. The younger ones tried to look modern, but there was something timeless in the way they held themselves, in the way they watched Bastian take his place at the high seat, with expressions ranging from respect to calculation. Amara sat in the human section, a block of seats separated from the vampire nobility by a silver railing that probably meant more than she understood. There were maybe 30 humans present, all of them looking nervous and out of place. She recognized a few faces from the Blood Court's outer offices, people who worked there or had contracts there. Bastian stood to address the assembly, and his voice carried through the chamber without amplification, strong and clear. I've called this session to propose a fundamental change to how our court operates, he said. For 300 years, we've participated in the commercial blood trade. We've bought, regulated, and consumed human blood as a commodity. We've built laws around it, made it safe and sanitary and legal. We've told ourselves that we were providing a service, that the humans who came to us did so freely, that our gold made the transaction fair. I stand before you today to say that we were wrong. The murmur that went through the assembly was like wind through dead leaves, dry and restless. We were wrong, Bastian continued, his pale eyes sweeping the chamber. Because no transaction is truly free when one party is desperate and the other holds all the power. Because we created a system where humans learned to price themselves by the pint, where a dying child's only hope was a sister willing to bleed for years. Because we've normalized exploitation by calling it commerce. A vampire rose from the front row, ancient-looking and draped in clothes that suggested Eastern European aristocracy. His voice cracked with age and authority. You speak of exploitation, young king, but we made no one come to us. The humans arrive at our gates of their own will. We force no one. We compel no one. How is it exploitation to provide what they request? Because we created the conditions that made them request it, Lord Corvus. Bastian's voice stayed level, but Amara heard the steel beneath it. We've hoarded wealth for centuries while human medical care became a luxury. We've built our mansions on blood money while families like Amara Rhodes's learned that their bodies were the only assets they had. We didn't put a knife to their throats, but we built the economy that made selling their blood seem like a reasonable choice. And who is Amara Rhodes to dictate our economy? Another vampire called out, female this time, young-looking but with eyes like frozen amber. A human who took your charity and now supports your crusade? Convenient. I'm someone who almost traded years of my life for my brother's medicine, Amara said, standing before she could think better of it. Her voice came out steady despite her racing heart. I'm someone who walked into the blood court ready to let the king drain me monthly, because I'd learned that my blood was worth something and my dignity wasn't. I'm someone who represents thousands of humans who've made the same calculation, who've stood where I stood and offered themselves up because we've all been taught that this is normal, that this is just how things work. She walked forward to the silver railing, gripping it hard. But it's not normal. It's not okay. And the fact that you've built laws and safety protocols around it doesn't make it ethical. It just makes it organized exploitation. The chamber erupted in arguments after that, vampires standing to shout their positions, humans in the visitor section murmuring their support or fear. Bastian let it go on for several minutes before calling for order, and when silence finally fell, he began presenting his actual proposal. The details were complex, but the core was simple. Phase out commercial blood purchase over 6 months. Establish voluntary donation centers with no monetary compensation. Fund them through the court's existing wealth, which was considerable. Criminalize black market blood trading with exile as the penalty. Reallocate resources toward making human medical care and social services more accessible, removing the desperation that drove people to sell themselves in the first place. You're asking us to impoverish ourselves for human comfort, Lord Corvus said, his ancient face twisted with displeasure. I'm asking you to stop profiting from human desperation, Bastian corrected. The court has more than enough wealth to sustain itself without the blood trade. What we don't have is the moral ground to continue it. The vote, when it came, was closer than Amara had expected. 47 vampires in favor of Bastian's proposal, 33 against, 12 abstentions. It passed, but barely, and the vampires who'd voted against it left the chamber with expressions that promised this wasn't finished. You've made powerful enemies tonight, Amara said later, when they were alone in the white chamber again. The session had lasted 6 hours, and dawn was approaching. She could see Bastian's exhaustion in the tightness around his eyes, the way he leaned against the table like he needed the support. I've made enemies who were already there, he said. I just stopped pretending we all wanted the same things. Some of them will fight this. House Corvus will challenge the ruling, try to find loopholes or force another vote. House Drackle will probably try to unseat me entirely. It's going to be messy. But you won. Amara moved to stand in front of him, taking his cool hands in her warm ones. You actually did it. You're ending the blood trade. We did it, Bastian corrected. Your testimony mattered. The fact that you were willing to stand there and tell your story to make them see what they'd been ignoring. I couldn't have done this without you. She wanted to kiss him, but he looked so tired, and dawn was coming. You should rest. You look exhausted. I'm always a bit exhausted this close to sunrise. It pulls at us even when we're underground. He smiled, though, and squeezed her hands. Will you come back tomorrow? I'm going to be dealing with fallout from this vote for weeks, but I'd like to see you. I'd like to have dinner with you, like normal people, or as normal as we can manage. I'd like that too, Amara said. The fallout came faster than either of them expected. 3 nights after the vote, assassins broke into the blood court's lower levels, vampires hired by House Corvus to make Bastian's reform permanent by making Bastian himself dead. They would have succeeded if Bastian hadn't been working late in the White Chamber, if he hadn't heard them coming with his predator's senses. Amara arrived at the court the next evening to find it in lockdown, guards at every entrance, and vampires moving through the halls with weapons. She was stopped at the gates by a severe-looking vampire woman who informed her that the king was unavailable, that there had been an incident, that human visitors were temporarily restricted. Amara talked her way past 4 checkpoints and 2 sets of guards before she finally reached the white chamber and found Bastian alive but wounded, a long cut across his shoulder that was healing slowly, too slowly for a vampire. "Silver blade," he said, seeing her expression. "Silver slows our healing. I'll be fine in a few days, but it's unpleasant." "Someone tried to kill you." Amara's voice came out shaking with an anger she hadn't known she was capable of. "Because you tried to do the right thing." "They failed." Bastian reached for her and she went to him despite his injury, letting him pull her close. "And now I have legal grounds to exile House Corvus entirely, which I'm going to do. The others will fall in line once they see I'm serious. Unless they try again. Unless someone else decides you're easier to kill than convince." She pulled back to look at him. "You can't just ignore this." "I'm not ignoring it. I'm dealing with it." His pale eyes were hard. "But I won't let fear change what we're doing. The blood trade ends. The system changes, even if it costs me." Amara realized then that loving him meant loving someone who'd choose principle over safety every time, who'd risk himself for beliefs she shared. It was terrifying and exhilarating, and she couldn't imagine wanting him any other way. House Corvus was exiled within the week, their assets seized and their members banished from court territory. House Drackle made noise about following them, but ultimately stayed, cowed by the swift punishment. The voluntary donation centers opened a month later, staffed by medical professionals and offering nothing but juice and cookies to donors. The initial response was mixed, but enough vampires participated that the system began to function. Amara watched it all happen while splitting her time between the hospital, where Marcus completed his final round of treatment, and the court, where Bastian worked endless hours to make his vision real. She became a familiar face in the White Chamber, someone the staff nodded to, someone who could walk the halls without escort. She also became aware of the price of being human in a vampire's world. The way time felt different, how Bastian could work through the entire night without tiring while she needed sleep and food and breaks. The way his enemies looked at her like she was a weakness, something they could use against him. The way some vampires barely saw her as real, just treated her like a pet the king had grown fond of. "It bothers you," Bastian said one night, reading her expression. They were having dinner in his private quarters, rooms deep in the court complex that were surprisingly comfortable, all dark wood and soft lighting and books everywhere. "Being here, being with me." "Not being with you," Amara said carefully. "But yes, being here sometimes bothers me. The way some of your people look at me, the way I can feel how temporary I am in a place where everyone else has centuries." Bastian set down his wineglass, his expression troubled. "I could offer you immortality. It's been done before. A human turned vampire, given the choice to stay." "Is that what you want?" Amara asked. "No." His answer came immediately, and she saw truth in his pale eyes. "I love you as you are, human, warm, temporary. I love that your time is finite, that every moment with you matters because there won't be infinite moments. I love that you age and change and grow. I don't want to freeze you into something unchanging, but I'd do it if it was what you needed." Amara thought about it, about living forever in this marble world of ancient politics and blood economics, about watching centuries pass while staying locked in her current self, about never growing old with the man she loved because he wouldn't grow old either. "I don't want that," she said. "I want to live a human life. I want to have the time I have and make it matter, and I want you in it for as long as we can manage, but I don't want to become what you are to keep you." Relief flashed across Bastian's face, so clear and sudden that Amara realized he'd been afraid she'd choose differently, that he'd have given her immortality while grieving the loss of what he loved about her. "Then we'll have this," he said, "however long this is. I'll take every year you give me and treasure it." They made love that night for the first time, and Amara discovered that vampire myth was wrong about some things, but right about others. He was cool to the touch but not cold, his skin like marble warmed by sun. He was careful with his strength, always aware that he could hurt her without meaning to. And he never, not once, let his fangs anywhere near her throat, kept his mouth on hers or her shoulders or her stomach, everywhere except the places where blood pulsed close to the surface. Afterward, lying tangled in his sheets with his hand tracing patterns on her spine, Amara felt more certain than she'd ever been about anything. This was right. this strange, impossible love between human and vampire, between temporary and eternal. This was what she wanted. Marcus finished his treatment 3 months after the court vote, declared fully in remission with an excellent prognosis. Amara cried when the doctor gave them the news, and Marcus hugged her so hard her ribs ached, both of them laughing and sobbing in the hospital corridor. "I'm going to live," he kept saying. "Sis, I'm going to actually live." "You're going to live," Amara agreed, thinking of the check that had made this possible, of the vampire king who'd refused to take what she'd offered and given her everything instead. She brought Marcus to meet Bastian a week later, nervous about how her brother would react to the man who'd saved his life, but also to the fact that he was a vampire, that his sister was in love with something technically dead. But Marcus surprised her by shaking Bastian's hand firmly and saying, "Thank you. I don't have words for what you gave me, what you gave my sister, but thank you." Bastian had looked uncomfortable with the gratitude, but he'd smiled and said, "You're welcome. I'm glad the treatment worked." They spent the evening together, the three of them in the white chamber, and Amara watched her brother and her lover talk about college and literature and the strange experience of survival. Marcus was still weak, still rebuilding his strength, but he was alive and laughing and planning for a future he'd thought he'd lost. Watching him, Amara felt the last piece of fear fall away. They had won. Against debt and disease and despair, they had actually won. The months that followed settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Amara moved into an apartment near the court, close enough to visit Bastian easily, but maintaining her own space, her own human life. Marcus went back to school, majoring in social work with the fierce determination of someone who'd survived and wanted to help others do the same. The voluntary blood donation system stabilized, with enough vampires participating that the court's food supply remained steady. But there were still challenges. House Drakel made one more attempt to call a vote of no confidence in Bastian's leadership, citing instability and loss of traditional revenue. The vote failed, but it revealed that a solid third of the court still opposed the reforms. There were incidents, vampires caught trying to establish new black markets, humans still so desperate they sought out illegal blood sales. Each case was dealt with, but slowly, through the careful grinding of law and policy. Amara became Bastian's unofficial advisor for human affairs, the one who could explain how his policies would actually affect the people they were meant to help. She testified twice more before the court, helped draft new social service proposals, worked with human advocacy groups to build bridges between the communities. It was exhausting and rewarding, and sometimes frightening, but it was also the most meaningful work she'd ever done. She was helping build something better, something that might actually last. 2 years after she'd first walked into the blood court offering her veins, Amara stood in the same white chamber watching Marcus get married. He'd met his fiancée Jessica in a survivor support group, and they'd fallen in love over shared trauma and hard-won hope. The wedding was small, just close friends and family, but Bastian had offered the court as a venue and Marcus had accepted. "Strange place for a wedding," Jessica's father said, eyeing the white marble walls with suspicion. "Strange place that saved my son's life," Amara's mother replied, and that ended the discussion. The ceremony was beautiful, human and normal, and full of life in a place built for the undead. Amara stood as maid of honor and watched her brother promise forever to someone he loved, and felt time settle around her in a way that was both comforting and melancholy. This was what human life looked like: growth and change and moments that mattered because they passed. Bastian stood beside her during the reception, his hand warm against her back. Well, not warm, never warm, but familiar and solid. "He looks happy," Bastian said, watching Marcus dance with his new wife. "He is happy. He gets to have a future now, because of you." Amara leaned into him. "Thank you. I know I've said it before, but thank you. Stop thanking me for doing what should have always been done." But he said it gently and kissed her temple. An old woman approached them then, someone Amara didn't recognize, but who wore the look of someone who'd survived hard things. She addressed Bastian directly. "Your Majesty, I wanted to tell you something. My granddaughter, she was about to come to the court 2 years ago. She needed money for her daughter's surgery, and she'd heard about the blood payments. She had the appointment scheduled. Then you changed the system, ended the commercial trade. and she thought she'd lost her chance. The woman's eyes were wet. But then the new human services program you established, it paid for the surgery, paid for everything. My great-granddaughter is healthy now, and my granddaughter didn't have to bleed for it. I wanted you to know what that meant to us." Bastian looked stricken and moved at the same time. "I'm glad she got the help she needed." "You gave people back their dignity," the woman said. "That's worth more than you know." After she left, Bastian was quiet for a long time. Finally he said, "I spent a century being angry about what I'd become. Angry at needing blood, at being a predator, at having to consume others to survive. I thought I'd made peace with it, learned to accept it. But hearing that woman, knowing that someone didn't have to trade pieces of themselves because we changed the system, that's the first time I felt anything like peace about what I am." Amara took his hand, threaded her fingers through his cool ones. "You're more than what you need. You're what you choose to do." "I choose you," Bastian said. "Every day, every moment, I choose loving you." "I choose you too," Amara replied. They danced at Marcus's wedding, human and vampire, moving together in a room full of life and laughter. People stared a little, but most of them had heard the story by now, knew that the pale man with the white hair was the king who'd reformed his entire society for the woman in his arms. 5 years after the initial reforms, the system was stable enough that Bastian could step back from constant crisis management. The blood trade was a memory, something historians studied and younger vampires barely understood. The voluntary donation centers functioned smoothly. The human services programs had expanded beyond what even Amara had hoped for. There were still problems, still vampires who resisted and humans who struggled, but the fundamental structure was better. Amara aged during those years, not dramatically but visibly. She found her first gray hair at 32 and laughed about it. Her face gained lines at the corners of her eyes from smiling. She was still young by human standards, but she could see time moving through her in a way it never touched Bastian. He seemed fascinated by it, by the slow changes in her appearance. He'd trace the new lines on her face like they were precious, tell her she was beautiful in ways that made her believe it. "Do you regret it?" Amara asked one night, lying beside him in his quarters deep beneath the city. "That I'm aging? That I won't stay frozen like you?" "Never," Bastian pulled her closer. "I love every change. I love knowing that I'm seeing things no one else will see, that every version of you is mine to treasure before time takes you further. I love that you're alive in a way I'm not, that you're still becoming while I'm just being." "That's a very romantic way of saying I'm getting old," Amara teased. "You're not getting old. You're growing. There's a difference." He kissed her, slow and deep. "And I'm going to love every moment of it, every year you give me, until time finally takes you from me entirely." They never talked about what would happen after, about the decades Bastian would live beyond her death. Amara knew it haunted him sometimes, that he'd catch himself calculating how much time they might have left, that he'd pull her close in the night like he could hold off the future through will alone. But they'd both chosen this, eyes open, and neither of them regretted it. Marcus came to visit regularly, sometimes with Jessica, sometimes with the baby daughter they'd named Carolyn. Amara loved being Aunt Amara, loved watching her niece grow with the same fierce attention Bastian watched her age. Life continued, human and warm and temporary. The assassination attempt, when it came, surprised everyone by coming from an entirely unexpected direction. Not from House Corvus remnants or blood trade supporters, but from young vampires who'd been turned recently and resented the king's relationship with a human. They saw it as weakness, saw Amara as proof that Bastian had gone soft, had betrayed his own kind for human approval. They broke into Bastian's quarters while Amara was there, 3 of them with silver blades and ideology burning in their eyes. They didn't expect Bastian to fight like someone with everything to lose, didn't expect Amara to have learned enough court politics to trigger the alarm system, didn't expect the royal guard to arrive within seconds. The fight was brief and brutal. 2 of the assassins fled. 1 didn't make it out. Amara had never seen someone die before, never watched life leave a body in real time. Even though it was a vampire, even though they had been there to kill her and Bastian, it shook her. She sat in the aftermath, hands trembling, while Bastian dealt with the guard and the investigation and the political fallout. When he finally came back to her, she was still sitting where he'd left her, staring at the place where the body had been. "I'm sorry," Bastian said, kneeling in front of her. "I'm so sorry you had to see that." "They wanted me dead because I'm human," Amara said, "because loving me makes you weak in their eyes. Loving you makes me stronger than I've ever been. It gives me reason to be better." Bastian took her cold hands in his. "But yes, there will always be vampires who see it differently, who see you as something I should consume rather than love. I can't protect you from that reality." "I know." Amara looked at him, at this ancient being who'd chosen her above convenience, above tradition, above his own kind's approval. "I'm not asking you to. I knew what I was choosing when I fell in love with you. I just wasn't prepared for how it would feel to have someone want me dead for it." They held each other for a long time after that, in the quarters that no longer felt entirely safe, and Amara understood something she'd been avoiding. Loving Bastian meant living in his world, and his world would always have edges sharp enough to cut her. But she stayed anyway, because love had always been about choosing someone despite the risk. The years continued their inexorable march. Amara turned 35, then 40. She took a position with the court's Human Affairs Office, making her advocacy work official. Marcus's daughter grew, and then Marcus and Jessica had a son, a boy named Cameron, who had Marcus's smile and his grandmother's determination. Amara's mother retired. Her father passed away quietly in his sleep, and the family gathered to mourn and remember. Bastian attended the funeral, the only vampire there, standing in the back like a pale shadow while the humans grieved their temporary lives. Afterward, Amara found him by the car, looking up at the daytime sky he couldn't stand under without burning. "I'm going to die too," she said, because it felt like something that needed to be said. "Not soon, I hope, but eventually. And you're going to have to do this again, stand at another funeral and watch humans mourn." "I know." Bastian didn't look away from the sky. "I've been preparing for it since the moment I fell in love with you. It's going to destroy me. Losing you is going to be the worst thing I've experienced in 2 centuries of existence. And I'd still choose this, choose you, choose every moment we've had and every moment we have left." Amara kissed him there in the parking lot, not caring who saw, and felt the truth of his words in the way he held her. When Marcus announced his engagement 5 years earlier, Amara had cried from joy. When he announced Jessica's first pregnancy, she'd cried again. Now, standing at his daughter's 5th birthday party, watching Cameron toddle around while Marcus and Jessica managed the controlled chaos of children hopped up on cake, Amara felt a different kind of emotion. Contentment, the sense that she'd been part of something larger than herself, that the choice she'd almost made 8 years ago to trade her blood had transformed into this, into life and family and futures. Bastian sat beside her on the porch, out of the direct sunlight but close enough to observe. He was better with children than he pretended to be. Carolyn had already figured out that Uncle Bastian would play elaborate pretend games and never got tired. "Auntie Amara," Caroline said, running up with her brother in tow. "Can Uncle Bastian come play vampires and vampire hunters?" "Oh, can I?" Bastian said dryly. "That's my favorite." "Please?" Caroline gave him a look that suggested she knew exactly how to manipulate adults. "Well, when you ask so nicely." Bastian stood and let himself be dragged off by 2 children who had no idea they were playing with an actual vampire king. Marcus came to sit beside Amara, watching his children recruit his vampire brother-in-law for games. "That's surreal," he said. "Welcome to my life," Amara replied. "You're happy, though, really happy." Marcus looked at her. "When you first told me about him, about what he'd done, I was grateful but worried. The age difference alone, setting aside the whole vampire thing. But you're genuinely happy." "I am," Amara smiled. "He's good to me. He's good for me. And yes, there are complications, but what relationship doesn't have those? Most relationships don't have might live forever while you die complications," Marcus pointed out. "No, but we've made peace with it. We're choosing to love each other anyway." Amara watched Bastian pretend to be dramatically defeated by 2 children with stick swords. "I'd rather have the time we have than never have had this at all." Marcus squeezed her shoulder. "Then I'm happy for you. Both of you. You saved my life, but he gave you yours back. I'm glad you found each other." 10 years after the blood trade ended, the court held a ceremony honoring the anniversary of the reforms. Amara stood on the dais beside Bastian, older now, her hair showing more gray, her face marked by time in ways that made her look lived in rather than old. She was 47, still vital, still fierce, but undeniably human, in a room full of ageless faces. Bastian gave a speech about progress and ethics, about the ongoing work of making their society better. Then he turned to Amara and spoke words that weren't in any prepared remarks. 10 years ago, a woman walked into my court offering to trade her blood to save her brother's life. I refused to take a single drop, not because her offer wasn't sincere, but because it represented everything wrong with the system we'd built. That refusal changed both of our lives. It started a reform that reshaped vampire society. It also gave me the greatest gift I've ever received, which is the privilege of loving Amara Rhodes. He took her hand, right there in front of the assembled court. She could have chosen immortality. She could have asked to be turned, to stay frozen at the age we met. I would have done it, however much it would have pained me to lose what I love most about her. But she chose to remain human, to age and change and grow, to give me her finite time rather than infinite existence. That choice, that trust, means more to me than anything else in my very long life. Bastian turned back to the assembly. Love isn't about possession. It isn't about consumption. It's about treasuring what you're given for exactly as long as you're given it. Amara has taught me that. She's taught me what it means to love someone, not as a resource, but as a person. I wanted to honor her today and to honor every human who's trusted us to do better. We're still learning, we're still changing, but we're trying, and that matters. The applause was genuine, even from vampires who'd opposed the reforms initially. Amara squeezed Bastian's hand and blinked back tears, overwhelmed by having her choice honored in front of everyone. After the ceremony, they walked through the court gardens, one of the few places with artificial sunlight safe for vampires. Amara leaned against Bastian's shoulder, tired in a way that spoke more to emotional exhaustion than physical. "That was beautiful," she said. "What you said." It was true. Bastian stopped walking and turned to face her. "I want you to know that I don't regret a single moment, not the complications, not the politics, not the knowledge that I'm going to lose you. You've given me the best decades of my existence." "We're not done yet," Amara said. "I'm planning on at least 3 more decades, maybe 4 if I eat my vegetables." Bastian laughed, that rare sound she loved. "Then I'll treasure every single year." They continued like that, year after year. Amara aged gracefully into her 50s and then 60s, her dark hair going silver, her body slowing but her mind staying sharp. She retired from the court's Human Affairs office at 65, but continued consulting on major policy decisions. She was there when House Dracul finally capitulated entirely to the new system, when the last black market blood ring was dismantled, when voluntary donation rates reached sustainable levels across all vampire territories. She was there when Marcus became a grandfather, when baby Caroline had babies of her own, when the family tree that had almost ended with Marcus's illness grew branches in directions Amara could never have imagined. And through all of it, Bastian was there. Unchanging in appearance, but growing in other ways, becoming warmer, more connected to the human world his court served. He learned to love change by loving her, learned to treasure temporary things by treasuring their time together. When Amara turned 70, they threw a party in the white chamber where they'd first met. Marcus was there, gray-haired himself now, with Jessica and their children and grandchildren. The court staff attended, humans and vampires who'd watched Amara age through the years, who'd seen this impossible relationship endure. 70 years, Amara said, looking around at the gathering, 33 of them with you. That's a good life. It's not over yet, Bastian said. No, but it's later than it was. She smiled at him. I'm not afraid of dying, you know. I'm afraid of leaving you alone. You're going to have centuries after I'm gone. And I'll spend them remembering you, honoring you, continuing the work we started together. Bastian held her hand, the one now marked with age spots and prominent veins, with the same reverence he'd held it when it was young. You're not leaving me alone. You're leaving me changed, made better. That's not the same thing. Amara lived to see 82, active and present until nearly the end, when her heart finally decided it had beaten enough times. She died in Bastian's arms, in the quarters they'd shared for decades, with Marcus and her family nearby. Her last words were, "Thank you for not taking my blood. Thank you for taking everything else instead." Bastian held her as her heartbeat slowed and stopped, as warmth left her body, as the woman he loved transformed into memory. He wept. This ancient vampire who'd seen centuries of grief wept like the world was ending because his world was. But he didn't fall apart. He'd promised her he wouldn't. Instead, he stood at her funeral and spoke about her courage, her fierce advocacy, her refusal to accept injustice. He watched her buried in the family plot next to her parents, under the sunlight he couldn't stand in, and then he went back to the blood court and continued the work they'd built together, because that was what she'd wanted, not for him to freeze in grief, but to keep changing, keep growing, keep making the world better. 20 years after Amara's death, the blood court commissioned a statue in the White Chamber. It depicted a young woman rolling up her sleeve, jaw set with determination, and a vampire king reaching out not to take, but to stop her. The plaque read, "In honor of Amara Rhodes, whose offered sacrifice sparked a revolution. She taught us that love means refusing to consume what we cherish." Bastian stood before it sometimes, in the quiet hours when the court was empty, and remembered. He remembered her courage and her anger and her laugh. He remembered the way she'd aged, each year marking her more beautifully. He remembered how she'd chosen mortality and him simultaneously, how she'd never regretted either choice. He remembered how she'd saved her brother by offering her blood, and how he'd saved them both by refusing to take a single drop. And in remembering, he honored her. He kept changing. He kept the reforms strong and expanded them further. He fell in love again eventually, centuries later, with another human who challenged him and made him better. Because Amara had taught him that love wasn't about holding on forever, but about treasuring what you had while you had it. The blood trade never returned. The system they'd built together lasted, strengthened by time and commitment and the memory of a woman who'd been willing to bleed but shouldn't have had to. In the end, that was Amara's legacy. Not her blood, which had never been spilled, but her refusal to accept exploitation as inevitable. Her belief that the world could be better, and her willingness to fight alongside a vampire king to make it so. She'd offered everything to save her brother. Bastian had refused to take what she offered and given her everything else instead. And together, they'd built something that lasted far longer than either of their lives. A love story written not in blood but in choice, in change, in the revolutionary act of treasuring someone for exactly who and what they were. The girl had come to trade her blood. The vampire king had refused to take a single drop. And in that refusal, in that moment of saying no to exploitation and yes to love, they'd changed the world.